Story 1. I went out on a date with a girl, and it went well. A few days later, she texted me, saying she was planning to take a high-paying job in New York. Having only gone on one date, I encouraged her to take it and wished her luck. She responded by politely asking me never to text her again. I later found out from a friend that she didn't actually move. Apparently, she does this often. Story 2. I was working in a bar when a customer asked me out for a few drinks. I knew her vaguely as she was a regular. I said yes, though I should have suspected something was wrong. She was stunning. Me? Not so much. We met and had a laugh and everything seemed great. We went to see a band at a local venue. When we arrived, she pushed towards the front, dragging me with her. She danced with me and grabbed my hands to hold her waist as she moved. Then I saw the lead singer of the band and recognized him as someone I had seen her with many times at the bar. Yes, it was her ex-boyfriend, and I was just there to make him jealous. Story 3. I travel often to Boston, which is about a 2-hour drive. While I was in the area, I matched with a girl and we hit it off. Unfortunately, our schedules didn't align, and I couldn't meet her, but we made plans to go to a concert together in Boston the following week. We spent the week texting, calling, and FaceTiming. I had a hotel booked and a place to meet up, and I texted her as I was leaving my home to head to Boston. She replied, "Okay, I can't wait to see you." And then I was on my way. After about 3 hours of driving due to traffic, I arrived at the venue a little early. I texted her that I was there and waited to go in. After 30 minutes without a response, I assumed she was on her way. I went inside, grabbed a drink, and relaxed. That's when I texted her again. She responded, saying she had been inside and actually had a good spot on the floor, asking me to head over. When I arrived, she was with a guy and started apologizing immediately. Apparently, within the 3 hours it took to drive to Boston, she matched with another guy on the dating app who was also attending the concert and decided to go with him instead. However, she said I could hang out with them during the concert if I wanted to. I politely declined. She reached out the next day, asking if I still wanted to meet up, but I just didn't feel up to it. The concert was fantastic, though. Story 4. I went on a date with a girl through a dating app. We had dinner and drinks, and everything was going well until she asked to see my work email. She mentioned that she enjoyed seeing her friends' and family's work emails as it provided valuable insight into their lives. At the time, I was working for a judge and everything was strictly confidential, so I told her no. She became upset, insisting it was not a big deal and that everyone she had asked had agreed to show their emails. I quickly paid for dinner, and we left shortly thereafter. Story 5. I met a girl I had been chatting with online for a few days. We went for late-night coffee and then sat in her car for hours, chatting away. The conversation turned to intimate topics. She threw herself at me and encouraged me to touch her. She was quite aroused, but we had agreed no sexual activity until next time, as she didn't want to engage on a first date. She was teasing, playing with me and then stopping, pretending to zip me up before pulling away. Then she pulled out a small tube similar to a urine sample container. She joked about how I must be ready to explode due to my arousal. I was very turned on and thought the tube was just a joke. It wasn't. She continued to hint at it before eventually getting angry and insisting that she wanted me to ejaculate into the tube for later use as lubricant. I wasn't sure if it was a fetish, but she seemed desperate at that point, and I managed to think clearly despite being aroused. Needless to say, I declined her request. She became quite upset, and I left. When I got home, I received numerous texts and missed calls. She eventually admitted that she had a husband who she felt wasn't able to impregnate her, even though they had been trying for years. They had agreed to find someone, me, to provide sperm, but he didn't want his wife to be sexual with another man. I dodged a bullet. Story 6. I was talking to a girl I met at a convention, and we decided to meet for a date. When I arrived, it wasn't the girl I had given my number to. That girl had passed my number to her friend, and I ended up talking to this other girl. I'm not sure if you would call it catfishing, but it certainly freaked me out. I stayed for dinner with her, then left and blocked her number. Story 7. My date had severe diarrhea and was rushing to various restaurants to use the restroom. None of them allowed him to enter. Story 8. We met online, chatted a bit, and decided to meet. This was not a casual encounter. We both clearly stated that we were looking for a long-term relationship. She was cute, seemed smart, and reasonably funny. When we started talking about hobbies and interests, I mentioned that I enjoyed reading, sailing, motorcycles, and playing music. She shared that she enjoyed live music, the theater, and occasional outings. Story 9. I went to a nice restaurant with a guy I met online. He went to the bathroom 3 times. When we met again, I hung out with him at his house, and he confessed that he loved cocaine and was using it in the bathroom during our date. I decided to cut off contact afterward. Story 10. I met a girl in a cafe, and we agreed to go out for a drink later that week. The day came, and she didn't respond. Later, she reached out to me again, saying she lost her phone, and we started dating. After a month, she told me that on the day we originally agreed to our first date, she was in jail for breaking into her ex's apartment. Story 11. 2 of my top surprising moments happened on the same first date. I had a mediocre date at a small patio bar. He ordered an entire pitcher of sangria for himself while I had a beer. I switched to soda after the beer once I realized he was drinking a bit too much. As we were leaving, he projectile vomited partially on the hostess stand, with most of it landing on a busy sidewalk. He also got some on his shirt. Concerned about him in his current state, I offered to give him a ride home. While walking to my car, he took off his shirt and asked, "Do you want to touch?" To which I politely declined. We got to my car, and I started to drive him home. He began to talk about his hobby of knife collecting, mentioning that he had a couple of knives on him at that moment. As we got closer to his house, he saw a couple of children who looked Middle Eastern and said, "I really dislike all these people ruining my neighborhood." I stopped the car about a block from his drop-off and asked him to leave. He scoffed and insisted I pull up a bit further, but I told him that this was as far as we would go. Luckily, he exited the car, and I headed home. There was not a second date. Story 12. I went on a first date with a woman about 7 to 8 years older than me. The conversation was going well at Applebee's until she asked if I wanted to go half on a baby. She mentioned that her biological clock is ticking and that she wants a child with me. Needless to say, that was our only date. Story 13. After dinner, she wanted to go back to her place, which sounded great, except it turned out she wanted to give me a multi-level marketing pitch. Story 14. She took me back to her place and asked if I wanted a snack. She brought out 2 fully rotten black bananas and 2 spoons. Cracking hers open, she started digging into the mushy banana, frequently glancing at me as if expecting me to do the same. Story 15. I went to pick up a girl at her apartment. She went to the kitchen to open a bottle of wine when I heard a crash followed by a horrible moan. I rushed to the kitchen, and she was having a grand mal epileptic seizure on the floor. I picked her up and carried her to the couch, holding on to her until the seizure passed. Felt like 15 to 20 minutes. Afterward, she was embarrassed and exhausted, falling asleep with her head in my lap. Later, I took her to her bedroom and left. She was a very sweet girl, and we dated for several more months after that. Story 16. She mentioned that her brother was her soulmate, and if he weren't her brother, her life would be better. Then she showed me a picture. It resembled me enough that I felt the need to excuse myself to use the restroom and block her number. Story 17. I went out on a date. At the end, we started making out. Something felt strange on my ear. I pulled back and saw a snake sticking out of the sleeve of her sweater. It was her pet snake, and it had been in there the whole time. Story 18. I was invited to play a game afterward and ended up in a call with a few other people who were also meeting each other for the first time. I then got ghosted. It was one of the weirdest dating experiences I've had. Story 19. In the first paragraph of the dialogue, she conveys that she just got out of jail, was married, and had children. I didn't know any of that going in. It was supposed to be a pleasant evening stroll. We smoked and chatted for a little while, but it was, in fact, not a walk in the park. Her husband called 3 times during our hour-long date, and she had to leave because of it. It felt like a scene from a David Lynch-directed episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Story 20. She canceled before our first date, stating there was no connection. However, we talked some more and agreed to go out again and hang out at her place for pizza and relaxation. I arrived at her place after driving for 45 minutes. We talked for 10 minutes about her dog, and she then said, "I'm tired," before going into her room and closing the door. The next day, she ignored me. Story 21. I had a date with a single mother, and her ex-husband followed us and pulled a gun on me in the parking lot of the restaurant we went to. Some people leaving the restaurant did not go back inside and called the police. Who knows what would have happened? Story 22. A woman brought her 6-month-old child with whooping cough to the restaurant. The child needed to go to the emergency room urgently. I said I was going to the bathroom, called the waiter, paid for the meal, and stopped by to inform her that I would not be continuing the date and that the child needed to see a doctor. I walked out feeling very angry. Story 23. On the date, he finally said, "I wanted to let you know I'm on a sex offender registry, but it's not what you think." He fabricated a story about a child having a crush on him and allegedly trying to get him imprisoned after he rejected the child's advances. In reality, I discovered he was a Walmart Santa and Easter Bunny, as well as a regular staff member, and was seen on camera committing abuse to a child in a toy aisle. There was no second date. Story 24. I went out to dinner with a girl. We had decided beforehand that if things were going well, we would head back to my place for a movie. Dinner went really well, so we followed through with our plan. I texted my roommate to let him know I was bringing a girl home, so he would be prepared. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw him, the only other person who lives in the apartment, walking to the grocery store. I opened the front door to pitch darkness inside, saw a giant balloon, and then heard my mom's voice as she came around a corner from the kitchen. It turned out she and my brother had decided to surprise me for my birthday by taking a 12-hour drive to visit for the weekend. The girl got to meet the family on our first date. Things went well for a few months until she moved away, and our relationship fizzled. But what a crazy story to tell now. Story 25. I picked her up at home, both still living with their parents. I made it around the corner at the end of her street and about 1 block down when a possum darted out into the street from behind a trash bin, directly under the passenger side tire. There was a thump. I experienced a rush of emotions. About 6.5 minutes after picking her up, I had to drop her back off to her very confused and concerned parents. They understood and took it well, but I never heard from her again. Story 26. The girl pointed out 3 guys she had been with while we were having coffee outdoors. She waved at 2 of them and borrowed a cigarette from one. It was an hour-long date, and we moved on after that. I don't care about a girl's past relationships, and I don't like them being paraded in front of me either. Story 27. We went off-roading, and I brought a grill to cook lunch later in the day. When she lit the grill, she caught the sleeve of her jacket on fire. We have been married for 14 years now. Story 28. Not as unusual as some of the others here. I met her for a cafe date. 10 minutes in, she remembered she had a video meeting for work. She took the call while I grabbed a book and read. We remained friendly afterward, but there was no second date. Story 29. In my early 20s, I planned a first date with a girl I met on an online dating app. She was supposed to meet me at my apartment, and we were going to play The Last of Us. In retrospect, it was not a good first meeting place, but she suggested it, and I went along with it. On the day of the date, she arrived at my apartment with her gay friend and another female friend. I don't have an issue with friends joining, but she never mentioned bringing them along, which made it very awkward at first. Then, her gay friend spent most of the date hitting on me and even asked what my body looked like. Still, it was not my most awkward first date. Story 30. We meet, and she is beautiful, just like her photos. We sit down for dinner, and her phone starts buzzing with texts. After a few minutes of this, she takes a look and starts texting. Every minute, more texting. Finally, she says, "I'm so sorry. I have a friend who has gotten drunk and needs a ride home. I need to go bail him out." She then invites me to join her, probably because she felt bad cutting our date short. I thought, what the hell? This should be interesting. We arrive at a bar, and there is a large man there, clearly intoxicated. He is talking to another woman and introduces us. This other woman was apparently stood up for a date. The four of us start talking, and the more we hear about the guy who stood her up, the more we realize she dodged a bullet. She shows us some of their chat, and he was deranged. We wondered how she ever considered being with someone so menacing. Apparently, her standards could use some improvement. About that time, she gets a message from him with a photo attached of the four of us. Yep, the guy was stalking her and took a photo of us while we were talking. He goes on in his text about how she's like all the other women he knows, sitting there laughing with other men without him, not caring at all how he felt, blah, blah, blah. We decide to stay there with her to ensure her safety. Meanwhile, Mr. Drunk is becoming even more intoxicated. He challenges me. So, you're her date, huh? Do you know that just last week I was with her? He tries to start a fight, but I remain calm and collected. My date finally decides that she needs to take him home. I help her get him to her car, and she takes him to spend the night at her place. That's the last I ever see of her. She texts me the next day and tells me the story about how she doesn't feel chemistry for me, how her father was an alcoholic, and how she was the only one in her family who loved him. She took care of him until he died, and now she is only attracted to alcoholics. She realizes it's messed up, but what can she do? Mind you, she has a respectable job and seems like a really decent person otherwise. Meanwhile, I'm at the bar with the other woman who is also drunk at this point. I feel for her and stay until she is ready to leave. I ask if she'd like me to walk her to her car. I don't have a car. I walked here from my apartment. Really? Ask. How far is that? A mile from here. And you were going to walk a mile in the dark when we know there's a guy stalking you close enough to take photos of us? I couldn't let that happen, so I drove her home. She invited me to her place and then propositioned me. I turned her down but came away with the most unique dating experience I had ever had. Story 31. I had been talking to this girl for about 3 weeks before we met. Everything was going great, and then she surprised me by telling me that she is married and in a polyamorous relationship. Somehow, I ended up being the bad guy for reacting with, "Are you kidding me?" Story 32. We discovered that we share the same birthday. She thought I was joking and somehow knew her birthday. I had to prove it by showing her my driver's license. We are now married and have celebrated 24 birthdays together. Story 33. She pretended to faint in the middle of the street, completely sober, to see if I would come to her aid. She also brought her friend on the date without mentioning it beforehand. Story 34. It was more of a hookup than a date, but I had a girl tell me, I would literally support Donald Trump if he destroyed my hometown. I had no idea what to say. Story 35. I went on a date with someone at the top of my age range of interest. He told me he was 37, but during our date, he mentioned he was actually 48. Story 36. I was 31 years old when I met a 28-year-old man online. He asked me out for lunch. During the date, he told me that he lives in a senior living center specifically for individuals aged 55 and older. I asked him how he could live there, and he explained that it is illegal to discriminate based on age. Felt quite unusual. Story 37. I was on a date with an Indian girl from a dating app, and during the date, she asked if I could tell she was brown from her pictures. She looked completely Indian. She was even wearing traditional Indian clothing and had henna in some of her photos. I didn't really know how to respond. It was such an awkward question. I have thought about this interaction for almost 6 years now and still have no idea what that question meant. Story 38. Dinner had been okay, with no sparks. While driving her home, she unexpectedly performed oral sex on me. A friend took her out a couple of months later, and she did the same with him. She was just a normal girl. Soft-spoken, nice, and completely opposite of what you would think. Wherever you are, Robin, thank you for being wonderful. Story 39. He said he would take me to the best spot in the city and took me to a self-service car wash just to stand there for a bit and watch people look at his car. He also casually used slurs during dinner at a Vietnamese restaurant. My first date ever, and needless to say, I did not want to see him again. Story 40. When we returned from our date and he brought me back to his house, he warned me that his dog was not very friendly. When I came in and saw a gate around the massive chow chow, the dog started barking. He then walked over and punched the dog in the face repeatedly. I asked him to bring me home. That was the last time we went out. Story 41. Date informs me that she is in an existing but mutually open relationship. She then offered me the role of a friend with benefits, even before our food had arrived at the table. Story 42. It was not the man's fault at all. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship. It was my first date with someone new. He took me to an outdoor concert downtown as part of a summer arts program. Who was playing? My ex. Apparently, he was filling in for the bassist of that band. He glared at me so much that my date noticed. We left and got tacos. That was awkward. The man was perfectly nice, but there was no connection, and we didn't have a second date. Story 43. I am blind. I met up with a guy for dinner. When he arrived, instead of approaching me and introducing himself, he texted me, "I have been sitting on the bench next to you for a while." Later, during dinner, he randomly told me he had taken my picture. When I asked why, he said it was to show his friends who he was with. I felt very uncomfortable and explained that people usually do not like their pictures taken without their consent. I thought, oh my God, what if he took a picture of me eating? Absolutely not. And he promised to delete it. Afterwards, I informed him there would not be a second date because of how uncomfortable I felt, and he then sent me the picture he took, which was of my hands reading the Braille menu. The entire experience was a definite no. Story 44. I am Lebanese. I went on a date with a Lebanese guy from my town. I had never heard of him, and the people in my town all know each other, so it seemed a bit strange to me. He got very drunk and drove us onto train tracks on the way home after our date. My gut was telling me something was very off. One online search later, I found out he had been in jail for being an accessory to murder and for drug trafficking in possession. Story 45. The guy kept trying to touch me in various ways, such as hand-holding, shoulder touches, and placing his hand on my back. He then referred to me as his future wife. When his mother called, he answered on speaker, and she said, "I don't want to interrupt your date. Say hi to your girlfriend and tell her she's beautiful." Before hanging up, I paid the bill, went home, blocked his number, and never thought about it again until now. So thanks for that. Story 46. I met someone online, and we decided to have a beer on a rooftop patio during the summer. I wore a sleeveless dress that highlighted my freckles. After one beer, he went on a tangent about how women should have their freckles removed. He claimed there was nothing more disgusting than freckles on a woman, telling me this while I was sitting there as a very freckly woman. I decided to pay for my beer, said goodbye, and as I walked away, he burst into tears and sobbed. Story 47. He needed to vomit, but instead of leaving the table, he denied it. He stayed at the table and held it in, desperately suppressing the urge while reassuring me he was fine. Story 48. He ordered water and mentioned he had already eaten. I thought we were going for dinner and that I needed to eat. I had a glass of wine. He started sharing information that felt overwhelming. I only see my daughter 2 hours a week, and it's supervised. He said he drove his dad's car here because he had to give his own to his ex. He picked up a roll, removed the fork, and began eating my food. I thought this was getting strange, so I said I had to go. I chose to visit a place where I know the servers and owners. I paid the bill and left. He seemed upset and mentioned he wanted a dominant woman, implying that I appeared to be one. I responded that it seemed more like he wanted a mother figure and someone to support him financially. Story 49. I went on a date a couple of months ago. She did not look like her photos. What surprised me was the extreme lengths she went to in order to send me fake selfies that looked real. She would send a picture of her shoes or something where I could see the lower half, then an hour later, I would receive an actual selfie with the same outfit. Some of these outfits were very unique. She wore the same clothes from those old selfies to her job to make them seem real. It was surprising because she didn't look bad at all. My first reaction was, oh, she's cute. Not what I expected, but it's not a big deal. During dinner, I began to realize how much effort she put into deceiving me, and I decided to leave. It was just too strange, and it was disappointing because she was nice as well. I just couldn't continue. Story 50. She had recently broken up with her fiancé, whom she loved. I went and picked her up. She immediately invited me in and introduced me to him, which was weird, but she also introduced him as her fiancé. We got into the car and headed out. I asked her if they had broken up. She said they were back together but still wanted to go on a date for fun. It was awkward for a moment because I was confused, and then she blurted out, "You would not believe what my therapist had the nerve to say to me today." Story 51. I was waiting at an Indian restaurant for a first date with a Korean-American woman I had known for months when she walked in wearing a traditional hanbok. Over 30 years later, she is still my wife, and I haven't seen her wear it since that day. It must have been some kind of test to see how I would react. Story 52. This guy kept talking about how great his mother was. When we finally got back to his place, he had pictures of her all over the room. Story 53. I stopped by one of my friend's houses to, unknowingly, use cocaine. I said I had left something in the car, pulled out of the driveway, and went about my night. Story 54. I took a girl to a fancy Italian restaurant after she told me Italian is her favorite. She then ate not one but 2 bacon cheeseburgers. Story 55. I met someone on a dating site. We talked for a few days on the phone before meeting. We had a brief conversation about pets, and I mentioned that I had a dog who was very spoiled and loved pig ears as treats, but would only eat them if I soaked them in water to soften them a bit. Fast forward to our meeting at Panera Bread. I made no mention of bringing my dog. I walked in and saw him sitting at a table with a pig ear soaking in a cup of water. Story 56. I went on a date with a woman who informed me halfway through that she has 2 children, which she did not disclose in her dating profile. She is also living with their father. I did not reach out for a second date after hearing that. Story 57. When I was 17, my boss set me up with her nephew, who was the same age. She said he was a really sweet guy, and we texted a bit before agreeing to get coffee. He picked me up in a nice truck, but he did not greet me or engage in any conversation at all. I figured he was really nervous, so I asked him about his truck and tried to make small talk about it until we reached the coffee shop. At some point, he snapped at me, saying, "It's not even my truck. It's my dad's. I borrowed it." We sat in awkward silence for a bit after that. When we got to the coffee place, he insisted we go through the drive-thru because there was this really cool place he wanted to take me to. I agreed, and he drove me out to his grandfather's old grain elevator. It was an abandoned building outside of town, and it was nighttime. We were very alone. The concept of stranger danger finally clicked in my 17-year-old brain, and I made a joke. "Well, we wouldn't want to get blood in your dad's truck." He didn't get the joke at all and just stared at me like I was crazy. It was then that I noticed a hospital wristband under his jacket sleeve. I asked him about it, and he admitted he had just gotten out of a bad breakup and had consumed 12 consecutive energy drinks to feel something, which resulted in a cardiac event. He had been discharged the same day he picked me up for coffee. Someone telling me they overdosed on energy drinks was not on my bingo card for that date. Story 58. We matched on a dating app and agreed to have dinner with minimal conversation. We met in front of the restaurant, and at that moment, he asked me if I wanted to have a threesome. Story 59. I picked up my date, and halfway to the restaurant, she told me she has multiple personality disorder. I tried to be kind and asked, "Oh, that's interesting. I've never met anyone with it before. What triggers it?" She then began to list everything: arguments, loud noises, pain, flirting, sex, drugs, drinking, Republicans, and more. I've never wanted someone to call with an emergency more in my life. Story 60. In college, I drove a pretty girl I had known in high school to a nearby college. She was considering transferring and wanted to visit. The drive took a couple of hours each way, making it a long outing. Throughout the trip, she talked incessantly about herself, mentioning how intimidated guys were to ask her out. She bragged about the prestige of the new school, subtly insinuating her own perceived elite status. When we returned to her apartment, I parked the car and looked her deeply in the eyes. There seemed to be nothing really connecting us, so I leaned in closer. She puckered up, waiting for a kiss or something else. I reached over her and opened her car door, encouraging her to leave. It was a satisfying end to the day. Story 61, went to the movies. Once the movie was over, she mentioned that she needed to use the restroom and then returned, proud of her accomplishments. We went to dinner afterward and then to my place. We enjoyed our time together, and that was it. Story 62. Late to the party, but here's my story. I met a guy a few years ago on a dating app. I don't remember which one or the guy's name. We met at the local mall and started driving around in his truck, just getting to know each other. Then, out of the blue, he casually said, "Yeah, I found out the girl I was dating was my cousin." I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a funny story about how he met a cousin he didn't know about. But no, destiny did not make my night better. He then added, "I went ahead and married her since we were already having sex." I was in disbelief, wondering if I had heard him right. I'm agnostic, but at this point, I was hoping this was going to lead to a really good or bad joke. Desperately trying to change the subject, he continued, "Yeah, we ended up having 3 kids, then getting divorced. We still get together every once in a while." I wasn't going to question what get together meant. By this time, I really didn't care. I said I needed to get back to my car because I had to be at work early, which was a lie. But when we parked next to my car, he insisted I listen to William Shatner sing the hits. My musical tastes range from rap to classical, but come on, William Shatner? As I went to get out of his truck, he leaned toward me for a kiss. I quickly left, went home, deleted the dating app, and showered the crazy off. Story 63, he ate a banana, including the peel and the crunchy tip at the end. I should have recognized the warning signs because he had many other strange behaviors, but I ignored them. That should have been my limit. Story 64. She went back to her place after dinner, making out on the couch when she suddenly pulled out a giant glass jar, reminiscent of an old-time moonshine jug, half full of pure GHB. She told me she had a date rape fetish and wanted me to drug her with it. I channeled my inner magician and quickly left the couch and exited through the door the moment she stepped into the bathroom. Story 65. We met at a bar and had a pretty normal conversation, then agreed to meet the next day for coffee. The following day, the conversation was again pleasant, but there wasn't really any spark. At the end of the date, he asked if he could kiss me, and I said sure, leaning in for what I thought would be a quick peck. Instead, he opened his mouth wide and began kissing me very wetly. It felt awkward, as he slobbered all over my face and tried to wrestle me with his mouth. It was an uncomfortable experience, and there was no second date. Story 66. A girl told me that she let her dog out into her backyard to relieve itself at night during the winter and forgot about him for about 8 hours, and he froze to death. I felt somewhat bad for her, but it was a strange topic to discuss on our first date. Story 67. We had texted before, and she asked about my height. I told her I am 6 feet 3 inches tall, which is true. However, when she saw me, she was rude. When I asked her about it, she said she was upset because she thought I had lied about my height. I suspect someone shorter had claimed to be much taller, which affected her expectations of what a 6'3" guy should look like. I realize now that I shouldn't have gone on a date with someone so fixated on height in the first place. Story 68. Not a first date, but it was significant. I was seeing Ben for about a month. The first date was fine, a quick coffee, but he wanted the rest of the dates at his apartment. I was broke and not picky, so that was fine. The only problem was that his roommate, Hugo, was always there. Everything we did revolved around his roommate. We had to watch wrestling because his roommate liked it. Hugo was clearly not mentally present and seemed to be on the autism spectrum. I lasted a whole month before saying, "Hey, how about coming over to my place this weekend?" I'll make dinner, and we can hang out or whatever. I was not subtle with the whatever. He did not like that idea, and we sort of fought about it for a week until I exasperatedly declared that this wasn't working for me. That's when he broke the news. He wasn't interested in me at all. We weren't dating. Ben had told Hugo that I was dating him, so Hugo was under the impression that we were in a relationship. Ben had been misleading me so that I would come over and hang out with Hugo, making it seem like he had a girlfriend. Story 69. Matched on a dating app. We met up at a bar and hit it off. I accompanied her on a walk back to her place, which was an old warehouse converted into a punk house with plywood walls for rooms. It was not a problem to go up to her room, but when she opened the door, 2 emaciated cats ran out. I was immediately overwhelmed by the stench of cat waste, and the litter box was overflowing. When I saw feces smeared on the floor from the open door, I quickly made up an excuse and left, deciding there would be no second date. Story 70. I went on a date with a man who had a young daughter. He did not ask me a single question, but I learned all about the time he was kicked out of a hockey game for being so drunk and belligerent that he was also arrested. Story 71. She wanted to play a game of 1 truth and 2 lies and said she had stabbed someone with a knife and they needed 13 stitches. She had sold sex for money. Once, she woke up naked in an attic full of marijuana that was hung up for drying. After I made my guess, she revealed that they were all true. Story 72. I went out to a movie, but his friend was a third wheel. I didn't know this until he picked me up because the friend was in the car. The movie was so bad that we walked out. Then he and I went to his car to make out, but something felt off. I pulled away and had to tell him his nose was bleeding during our makeout session. He just said, "Yeah, sorry, it happens sometimes." I felt bad for him, but I was surprised. Then, while backing out of my driveway, he ran over my dad's rose bushes. It was an odd night. Story 73. I went to see Guardians of the Galaxy in theaters with a girl I met on a dating app, and it was going really well to the point where we started making out. Then, out of the blue, she wrapped her hands around my throat and started choking me. She said it was her kink, and I wonder if she was actually just trying to kill me for some reason. At least she could have asked first. Story 74. Stretching the question a bit because the whole situation became intense on the 3rd date. But on the 1st date, this girl was very nervous and kept drinking daiquiris. She mentioned that it made her anxious that I don't drink or smoke and that I ran for fun at the time. She felt like an out-of-shape person. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt because 1st dates can be nerve-wracking. I don't even remember our 2nd date, but it either went better or was uneventful because we planned a 3rd date on Halloween. Halloween arrives, and I had known her for 2 or 3 weeks at that point. She said she started running to help us feel like we could fit together better. We ended up in an extremely crowded part of town, and by chance we ran into my aunt. It was so packed that my uncle and I stood at the bar, even though neither of us drinks, just to reduce the wait time for my aunt and this girl. We got them their drinks, and then she exclaimed, "I just received a text from my friends at a bar 11 blocks away in another crowded area. We have to go. It's an emergency." Before I could process this, she threw her head back and downed her beer faster than I'd ever seen. My aunt just shrugged, and my uncle had a look of disbelief on his face. I asked her if she was ready, as 11 blocks isn't far. We started jogging, but she could not keep up. She kept stopping to catch her breath, wheezing and bending over. I tried to encourage her to reach this emergency without passing out. When we finally arrived, she ran upstairs and into the bathroom. I had no idea where she had gone, and I searched the bar for her. Convinced she had left me, I went to the men's bathroom before leaving, and she bumped into me coming out of the women's. I said, "Oh, there you are. What was the emergency? Is everything okay?" She replied, "Yes. My friends scored some cocaine, and I wanted to get here before they used it all. They're not the kind of people who would save some for me." I can barely remember what I said because I was shocked and upset, but it involved how, in my upbringing, emergencies are when someone is bleeding, unconscious, or on fire. I mentioned that if she thinks cocaine is an emergency, then she needs help, and if she can't trust her friends to include her, then she needs new friends. I also suggested that if she can't run 11 blocks without struggling, our lifestyles may not be compatible. Her response was something along the lines of, "You don't have to be rude about it." And about 10 minutes later, I was back with my uncle again. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.